institutional and agency effects on the status of free blacks, synthesizing asymmetrical laws and social conditions with asymmetrical economic outcomes. Speech by James Edward Curtis Jr., October 23, 2010, written by James Edward Curtis Jr., February 2002. The laws. The sources of social freedoms for free blacks was quite different than that of whites. Whites functioned in American society based on natural rights protected by clauses in the United States Constitution. However, the free black existed based on manumission. The status of free blacks in America, as with any American, is directly linked to his or her rights and protections as articulated in the Constitution, as interpreted by the courts, and as enforced by agents of federal, state, and local governments. Federal level decisions tended to vary based upon the individuals in office, but state government, as the dominant interpretation of the United States Constitution uplifted, tended to have control over the degree to which free blacks had legally enforceable freedoms. Ultimately, the degree of restrictions on free blacks' citizenship depended on the location and distance of a state from the least restrictive upper northeast to the often most restrictive southernmost part of the South. Yet, citizenship restrictions tended not to interfere with the property holding rights of free blacks in any state. Institutional and agency effects on the status of free blacks, synthesizing asymmetrical laws and social conditions with asymmetrical economic outcomes. The demography. The United States Census shows that there was approximately 1 free black for every 10 slaves and 1 free black for every 50 whites enumerated between 1790 and 1860. While proportion of enumerated free blacks remained constant between 1790 and 1860, the proportion of slaves enumerated fell, while the proportion of whites enumerated grew. Geographic choices, which were unbounded by the dominant constitutional interpretation, yet constrained by Midwestern and Southern state laws, have potential implications on how free blacks, on average, were socially received by whites, and on their available set of employment opportunities. Free blacks were more concentrated. Throughout the entire antebellum period, over 50% of the United States free black population lived in the modern Mid-Atlantic region. The Mid-Atlantic region produced the states with the highest percentage of free blacks in the state population. Free blacks in Delaware, Pennsylvania, and the District of Columbia all exceeded 10% of the state population throughout much of this period. The presence of the federal government in this region during politically favorable administrations was an additional economic factor potentially causing this concentration of free blacks. The characteristics of free black immigrants, if different from those who did not immigrate, also directly impact the analysis of the domestic free black experiences. Therefore, an analysis will be divided up into free blacks that immigrated to Canada, Central America, and Africa. In sum, approximately 1 in 10 1850 U.S. free blacks immigrated between 1850 and 1860. About 4 to 5% immigrated to Canada, another 4% of free blacks immigrated to Africa, and some even immigrated to Central America. The economic position of free blacks that immigrated to Canada varied as much as those that did not immigrate. If the Canadian experience is consistent with free black immigrants to other countries, concerns about selection bias in the study of domestic free blacks should be minimized, and the role of federal and state laws on immigration patterns should be examined more closely. Institutional and agency effects on the status of free blacks, synthesizing asymmetrical laws and social conditions with asymmetrical economic outcomes. The economic analysis. Studying racial differences in factor market, supply decisions, and prices as reflected in the literature on labor supply, wages, and income presents only a subset of the factors that determine the accumulation and storage of assets over the lifetime of black and white households. This study will focus on differences in wealth between free blacks and whites. Researchers in Philadelphia Abolitionist Society studies attempted to address free black-white wealth differences, often using a piecemeal approach. Furthermore, Theodore Hirschberg and W.E.B. Du Bois did not use the analytical tools needed to fully explain their results. Furthermore, their studies lack a full description of the data collection procedures in their research. Age wealth profiles. To analyze the relationship between age and wealth, I employ additional methods that were first employed by Lee Salto. Age, wealth, and savings. I used the method proposed by Lee Salto to analyze savings using wealth annualized at each age. Black-white relative wealth ratio and black-white relative property holding ratio. Each cross-section will be analyzed based on wealth and property differences among free blacks, free black wealth and property as a portion of white wealth and property, and free black and white premiums to investing in a particular characteristic. Institutional and agency effects on the status of free blacks, synthesizing asymmetrical laws and social conditions with asymmetrical economic outcomes. The empirical results. Age property profiles. In 1850, between 35.8% and 67.1% of whites were real estate property holders across different age groups, while only 14.3% to 28% of free blacks were real estate property holders across age groups. Age wealth profiles. The dominant wealth possession of whites remained across time, education, and region. These profiles are preliminary evidence that making choices to improve education and social surrounding did not provide a clear wealth reward. The local definition of free black rights have diluted any attempts to make individual economic gains. Age, wealth, and savings. White households actually save less real estate wealth annually than free black households in 1850. In terms of total wealth, free black households were saving more than whites in 1860. This is both attributed to the low level of wealth in which free blacks started from and possibly the desire for their descendants to have an enriched economic experience. literacy, and wealth. Free blacks and whites were proportionally penalized, but not proportionally rewarded for literacy. This analysis directly links the asymmetrical enforcement of federal statutes by states, which affect the rights of free blacks, to asymmetrical wealth returns to the optimal generating characteristics such as literacy. Urban wealth versus rural wealth. The agricultural economy forced rural free blacks to be homeowners and maintain a positive amount of wealth at greater rates than urban free blacks engaged in manufacturing and service. But social isolation and invigorated enforcement of federal laws pushed many free blacks to urban areas and to forego this wealth premium for greater social harmony. Free state wealth versus slave state wealth. Results confirm that reduced legal barriers, greater social receptiveness, and enhanced economic opportunities contributed to the wealth advantages of free blacks in free states. Regional wealth. A negative correlation between free black wealth and regions with present or past legalized slavery emerged. Regions with no history of slavery had the wealthiest free blacks, such as the Midwest and West. Free blacks in regions that once legalized slavery but abolished these practices had slightly lower levels of wealth, such as the Northeast and Mid-Atlantic, and free blacks residing in regions where slavery was still legal had the lowest amounts of wealth, such as the Southeast. Migration and wealth. Changing regions before and after emancipation was crucial for blacks to accumulate significant amounts of wealth. To the contrary, whites that stayed in their states of birth possessed higher wealth returns than migrants. This may further imply that whites with longer history of legal enforcement of citizenship and larger intergenerational transfers were more successful growing their wealth by staying, but blacks grew wealth by migrating to places with the smallest legal barriers, that were more social receptive and possessed the greatest economic opportunities. The conclusions. Free black constraints to generating wealth were observed when analyzing differences in the returns to all the optimal wealth generating choices. Changing states and regions was one of the crucial steps for free blacks to accumulate significant amounts of wealth. Yet laws prevented free blacks from having a full range of residential and, as a result, economic opportunities. In some, asymmetrical legal and social constraints rooted by a contradiction between the dominant interpretation of the United States Constitution and state laws led to asymmetrical economic experiences among free blacks and whites during the antebellum period. Furthermore, the intertemporal expectation of converging wealth experiences is severely dampened, not only by initial wealth deficits in the free black community, but also by intertemporal social and legal constraints on economic choices to overcome these deficits.